Hey everyone, this is Kenny Coins with Marathon Money. I'm with Dr. Geoffrey Dow, 60 Degrees Pharmaceutical. For you guys who don't know, that's the ticker SXTP inside the ticker. So we're gonna talk about his new drugs, stuff that been patent and all that stuff. But let me get it going forward. So Dr. Dow, you actually worked for the government for a really really long time, and now you move to the commercial side to try to commercialize this babeosive drug.
Yeah, so Kenny, it's nice to meet you. I worked at Walter Reed's Army Institute of Research in DC for about 10 years before founding 60 Degrees Pharma as a private company about 15 years ago. And then we were listed on NASDAQ in 2023. And we have an approved drug called Arikota, which was approved by FDA for malaria prevention in 2019. And our core R&D strategy is to reposition that drug to treat a tick-borne disease called babesiosis, which is transmitted by the same ticks that cause Lyme disease.
Yeah, but a lot of people think you're a malaria prevention company, but your real moonshot is the babesiosis. Am I correct?
I think that's a fair characterization. I mean, our background expertise is in malaria and parasitic diseases. Yes. That's how we got Arikota approved. The potential market for a babesiosis drug, we think, is substantially higher than malaria. And we're using that same regulatory and scientific experience with malaria on babesiosis, which is also a parasitic disease. It's just transmitted by ticks, not mosquitoes.
Yeah, no, I saw that's one of the things. So there might be a lot of people that don't know they have it, and then that's kind of segment into what I want. I also learned that the CDC might be underreporting those cases. That actually might be 20, 30 times that out there, because I know you commissioned a nationwide survey of like 6,000 patients, 300 healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
What is that data telling you guys? That CDC is numbers don't show.
Yeah, the CDC has a very strict definition of a case, and it's voluntary. And of course, it's annoying for physicians to fill out the forms. And so with all tick-borne diseases, the number of cases tends to be undercounted in official statistics. So if you just go by what's on the CDC website, you might think, well, might be medically important, but not very interesting commercially. And so we did some research to try and find out, where that opportunity might lie. And when we looked at medical claims, so that's basically insurance claims for babesiosis, it suggests about 25,000 cases a year versus, 2,000 or 3,000 on the CDC website. But even that underestimates the potential for chronic illness, because if people don't know they have it, or it's a disease that there's not much awareness of, then you're not going to claim medical insurance costs for something that isn't being treated. So we see a potential upside there that's under-recognized in either official statistics or in medical insurance claims.
So basically, if you guys can prove it's affecting like millions of people, then this will be a multi-million-dollar market that nobody sees yet. Is that fair to say?
Yes, qualitatively, I think that's fair.
Is that what you guys are trying to prove right now? That this is actually affecting way more than what they're reporting?
Yeah, so I mean, one of our clinical studies, for example, is in chronic disease. It's at Mount Sinai. And our goal there is to both treat patients who have chronic babesiosis, but also do a bunch of diagnostics to prove that we can identify and define a case using FDA-approved diagnostic tests, and that the diagnostic tests that are out there to treat that or diagnose the disease actually work the way they're supposed to.
Wow, that's amazing. I also saw that, when I was doing my research as well, Yale just published a data showing 100% cure rate, 7 out of 7 patients cure of relapsing babesiosis using triclofor. I don't know how to say that properly,
No
but
problem. So the generic name of our product is tafenoquine. That's the
tafenoquine. Yes,
yeah, that's the active
that's extraordinary. How
yeah.
significant is that for you guys and for
It
people that do have it?
Yeah, so the patients that we did that study in, they're immunocompromised, so they might have had cancer, they might be taking an immunosuppressive drug, they might have no spleen, they've contracted the disease and it's relapsed several times, and they've been treated multiple times, and those prior treatments have failed. So in the first 4 patients, that was part of a Yale study where they showed that combining our drug tafenoquine with other agents that had previously failed had a really high cure rate. And then in our expanded access study, we aimed to confirm that finding and added 3 more patients to the list, and showed again that tafenoquine had cured the 3 patients that were in our trial, sort of reinforcing the findings that Yale found in the first 4 patients. So if you've got that disease and you've got a regimen that has a high confidence in cure rate, it is life-changing for you personally. What it signals for the company as a whole is that our regimen can eradicate infection in patients, and that has broader application to other groups of patients beyond the immunocompromised folks.
My question is like, do you feel like a lot of Wall Street analysts are not aware of the data? Because also, the question does come to mind. I see that Telfequin specialize in like daily doses. No, not daily doses, weekly doses. Unlike most drugs in that environment or in that industry requires a daily dose. But it feels like you're still extremely undervalued because your stock is currently trading at $2.40. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel like you guys are just completely under the radar?
So, yeah, we've sometimes joked that for a company with an FDA-approved product, it's sort of odd to have a market cap of, 5 million or so. And so I don't know if it's underappreciated, but certainly undervalued. And, we do work in infectious disease and parasitic disease specifically, which is not always traditionally been something that's of high interest to more traditional investors. But we do think there's a niche opportunity there in tick-borne disease, which no one else is going after, and with a potentially curative regimen that will be quite life-changing. And if we're right about the number of patients, then, as you pointed out, it is a multi-million-dollar opportunity that we hope to crack into in the next year or 2.
Okay, from a business perspective, how big is the compliance advantage? Because easier dosing drives adoption, or which drives revenue?
Yeah, so in the context of malaria prevention, which is the approved indication by FDA, there are 2 options. You can do weekly or you can do daily.
Yeah,
We think that the weekly option is probably at least 40 or 50% of patients who are willing to pay pay for the drug as appropriate. And so it just depends on your patient preference. Some people already take daily meds, and that's so there's not much advantage to those patients. But if you're like me and you're not very good at remembering taking meds, then having a once weekly option is quite attractive. And so we see a significant segment of the market that's interested in that particular feature and benefit. And then, of course, the other thing about our drug that's quite unique is you can actually use it everywhere in the world for malaria prevention, whereas some of the existing drugs are limited geographically because of either drug resistance or they just don't work against some of the species of malaria.
Now, one thing about malaria I do know, last year I was out in Zanzibar, and then there was a girl that was around us. She caught malaria.
Okay.
How are you planning to push this internationally, or is that something that's already done?
So typically in most malaria endemic countries, it's not universally true, but in most of them, they don't usually do weekly malaria prophylaxis or weekly prevention. And that's because malaria is usually a seasonal disease and you don't want people on prophylaxis continuously for, throughout their life. But where our drug is used in endemic countries is as a single dose to treat a disease called vivax malaria, which is basically an acute form of malaria, a particular type of it. And we are supporting some ongoing research studies in Thailand and Latin America to expand the way that drug's used in terms of combining it with other drugs and altering the dose regimen. It's not a commercial opportunity necessarily for us, but we are supporting the research of others in an in-kind way.
Oh, wow. I mean, also you have significant amount of skin in the game. In the past few months, you have bought tremendous amount of your own stock, which has been beating down. And what kind of message are you trying to send to like retail investors?
So, I'm not super wealthy, but every time there's an opportunity in an open window to buy shares, I do. And that's because I'm confident that we will get to cash flow positive and profitability on the first indication for malaria. And then, the opportunity in babesiosis will expand that further.
And as we talk about profitability and growth, Q3 of 2025, you had 223 revenue growth year over year. Pharmacy deliveries are up 14%, and you got GoodRx Live and Run Health launch in April 2026. What does that revenue trajectory look like from here?
Yeah, so we've continued to increase our sales 10 to 20% a year over the last couple of years. And I think at the moment where we are positioned commercially is on the malaria indication is experimenting with a few market initiatives to see what drives sales. So, for example, last year we employed our first 2 virtual sales representatives, and they did a great job increasing sales where there was already some brand awareness. But we know from the market research that overall the brand awareness for ARAKODA is low, so we need to improve on that. So we're doing some things with an online platform called Dosimetry, and just continuing the outreach to physicians to articulate the benefits of the product. And then to that, we've added a couple of other initiatives this year. One was GoodRx, which you mentioned, and that's to provide a point of sale discount to patients who may not necessarily be covered by insurance. And then on the Runway Health, you would have seen that there's been a trend in, particularly with like the GLP-1 drugs and some other products towards direct to consumer channels like Hims and Hers and platforms like that. So Runway Health is the first travel associated direct to consumer kind of offering. And we're partnering with them to offer ARAKODA on their website. And the nice thing about that is it targets an already qualified group of patients who we know are traveling and may have a need for the product. And So that's sort of the collection of things that we're trying out to see what, the customer acquisition cost is, and then we can scale from there depending on the results of each one.
Yeah. So on the customer acquisition, so like the run rate, when do you think, I know you can't give us a direct date, but like when could this possibility happen? And sometime in 2027 where you go from pre-profitability to profitable?
It's possible if we meet our targets towards the end of 2027.
Okay.
But that's obviously has a lot of caveats associated with it,
Of course.
and is speculative.
Of course, it's ebbs and flows. I mean, things happen,
Yeah.
and you got to adjust and hurdle over those things. Um, your company has calculated the addressable market for babesiosis treatment of 245 million dollars annually, 1.1 billion community. But the one indication, what total picture of you hit even 2 or 3?
So, one of the challenges with a disease that is not really very well recognized in the medical literature is how much of it is there. And so when you do a marketing assessment, you're kind of limited by the known information. So we did a speculative market research study to see what the upper limit of it could be in theory. And that's the number that you were citing. And at 10 years out from an FDA approval, if we, that's the ceiling on what's possible. And so what we'll be doing over the next year or so, as we get more information about, the market and where we think we'll tighten up the limits on those market estimates a bit as we move forward, just so there's greater clarity. But certainly we think that the opportunity is quite a bit larger than malaria, and it could be quite substantially more than the disease counts that are implied by medical claims and other sources of information at the moment.
No, I want to ask you, about the bull case on this. And like, if you can paint me a picture, everything going right, trial hits, FDA approval, cell ramps, where is 60 Degrees in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so we, of course, with these 3 patients cured, it's our belief that our drug works. Now, your belief about the drug working is not the same as FDA agreeing with that. So we have a hospital study that will report an interim analysis in towards the end of Q3 of this year. And if we are lucky enough to get statistical significance in that study, then that data combined with the 3 patients cured or 7 patients cured that we already have, I think would be a fairly compelling package to put in front of the FDA. And if that's where we end up, then we'd be looking at some sort of submission in probably Q2 of 2027, and then an approval towards the end of 2027. So that's sort of the timeline if we hit that interim endpoint the way we'd like to. And then, from there, the goal would be to be able to commercially market the product for both babesiosis and malaria. And then we're looking at a pretty rapid trajectory to, good profitability.
So, hearing all these things, I do want to go back to like the sales initiative, and you hired 2 other people. What goals are you going to be looking for as we close out this interview? And what goals are you going to be looking for from those sales initiative, from GoodRx, from One Way Health? Is there particular things you're going to go, okay, this is going the right way, let's double down, let's triple down? What are you looking for as the CEO of this company from those partnerships?
So in terms of the sales reps, we're just looking at basic bottom line prescriptions and comparing outcomes from this year compared to a baseline. For GoodRx, we have an internal forecast in terms of what we want to see the growth of that look like. And in particular, is the price point working for patients? And then as it relates to Runway Health, they're a growing business. We'd like to see our products become widely used on that platform and again meet an internal forecast that we have. And then each of these three things have a 12-month runway on them, and then we'll reassess where we are periodically and scale if or when they look like they're hitting the benchmarks.
Man, that's pretty amazing. I do wanna ask you, with things happening in for April with Runway Health, is there anything other in the next 2 quarters that retail investors, institutional investors should be looking out for, that, milestones you guys are looking to hit in the next 2 or 3 quarters?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have some outputs out of our expanded access study, just sort of periodic updates on where we are with diagnostics and recruitment. So that'll give folks a sense of how that critical trial is going. And then we do have a potential new product. It's a botanical, which we've in the process of going through an FDA process for. And we hope to get some news about that in late May. And then, the second half of the year will be the hospital study reporting out on its interim endpoint. And that will be pretty pivotal in terms of whether we're going on an aggressive early kind of approval or whether it's going to take longer and take more patients.
Well, thank you so much, Doc. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I would love to catch up with you at end of Q3, see what's going on and see how the cell initiative is going, how the partnership is going. Definitely, Runway Health starts next month, and see how that's going and how you guys growing. And, definitely with the babesiosis, with that seeming like more like a moonshot, I definitely want to see how that's going, because I feel like that is more I read and more I learn, I feel like that is a growing issue that people are unaware of, because most people are just looking for the CDC to see if it's a epidemic or a real problem. But if you guys can figure out if it's a real problem, there might be a multi-billion-dollar opportunity.
Yeah. So of course, if you're a patient with chronic babesiosis, you already know it's a problem.
Yeah, 100%.
And you already know that the mainstream medical folks aren't addressing an issue that's important to you necessarily. And we're really hoping that what we're doing as a company can continue to improve those folks' lives. And if we're right about the market size, it could be really attractive to investors as well.
And thank you so much. Peace.